be angry. So by the time they get to have hormonal imbalances, they're pretty rageful. So I am just so happy that you were able to take the time out to help women with that difficult situation. So,
Happy to be
you
here. Thank you for inviting me.
thank you.
Are we going to do a presentation style or interview style?
We can do interview or presentation. I thought you were going to do a presentation, but if not, I love to ask questions about it.
Okay, why don't you fire away? We'll do interview style because that's what I was prepared for. So,
Okay. So, in how should I put it? I gave a good intro, I think, in the fact that women over time are taking care of the family and the, community and themselves and maybe not themselves. So, how do people deal with the anger that they have really deep inside?
well, I think uh, in general we have a problem, obviously, in our society. I mean, all you have to do is turn on television or scroll social media, and you can see a lot of angry people, a lot of people who are not able to control their emotions very well. Things build up very easily. We get triggered very easily. This is true for men and women. It's not exclusively one gender or another. So we have a big problem in our society today with emotions in general, anger in particular. And a lot of it is because we haven't really been educated properly. The things we've been taught how to understand our emotions are not really accurate. And so we've got bad models for understanding our emotions, which makes it hard for us to take control of our emotional states. I mean, it's one of the things our body gets triggered and we have an emotion. And it looks to us like that's all that's going on. It's the one causing two, a direct cause effect relationship. And that's how we grow up. That's what our common sense tells us. That's what everybody reinforces around us. Oh, you made me angry, or this made me angry, or some triggering event, set me off or whatever it is. And it happens also, you can happen with your own body. I mean, you can uh, be in a more irritable state through hormonal changes or through not getting proper sleep or just being hungry. And it can make you more susceptible to being irritated, to being angry. But so there are outside triggers, and then there's a state of our body at any moment when that happens, which contributes, maybe makes us more prone to being irritated, more prone to being angry. But then there's the actual process of, well, where's the anger being generated? How does it happen? And we've been taught to believe it's the outside world that's mainly causing our anger. What you did, what you didn't do, the way the face you made at me, your body language, the government, COVID, whatever it is, okay? Uh, and and then we have our feelings in reaction to that. And the problem is we're missing uh, pieces of the puzzle that are invisible. And they're visible because they're taking place in our brains. So we don't realize, and we're not being taught that the source of our emotions is our brains. Our brains are actually creating the emotions. So when you say what caused my anger, there's a trigger that may have precipitated your anger, but that's not the cause. The cause is what's going on in your brain, the way your brain told you to look at that situation, to think about that situation, to beliefs or assumptions or whatever. Your brain's doing things to make you look at that situation in certain ways that will generate the emotion of anger. It's the same for any other emotion. If you have anxiety or panic attacks or something like that, your brain is making you look at things in certain ways. Same with guilt, the same with sadness. Each emotion has certain formulas that our brains use to produce the emotion. And it's all invisible. So unless you know what these things are, or unless someone's helped you understand them, um, most people are walking around missing those puzzle pieces. So when they get angry and they say, okay, now what can I do about my anger? The most important puzzle pieces are not available to them. That's where you really have the most control over what your brain is doing. You can't really change the outside world most of the time. If you can, that's great. All right, but it's rare, you know. So it gets back to the point that we have this societal problem where we haven't educated people to understand how our own brains are creating our emotions, and not just that they are, which is a big leap in understanding, but specifically, how do they do it for each emotion? And when you have that understanding, when you understand the exact mechanism that produces each emotion that you may be experiencing, then now you have some power in the matter. You can step in and you can do something about that emotional reaction. Then you can't do something maybe about being triggered and to have the reaction, but once you have it, then you don't have to let it keep going on, for weeks and months and years, or you don't have to let it interfere with your relationship or affect your health. You can step in and shut it off if you want to, once it's happened. And then over time, you can literally stop getting as triggered as you were in the past, which is what happened for me. Back when I was in my 20s and 30s, I had a lot of anger in my life. I was triggered very, very easily, and lots of things would set me off. When I opened my practice, my internal medicine practice, I used to get angry at my patients all the time when they wouldn't follow my advice, or they wouldn't, they would make bad decisions, which of course people are prone to do. I took up tennis, in my late 20s, and I was literally like John McEnroe on the tennis course, not on a tennis court, not tennis wise, but in terms of yelling and screaming and thrashing my racket around and disturbing the people, playing on either side of me and stuff like that. And I just couldn't control it. And the reason I couldn't control it is, despite all my education that I had, and I was very educated, very well educated, I nobody ever clued me into how my emotions were getting created. And so I was walking around with these missing puzzle pieces, and it was every relationship I had with a woman failed, partly because of that. It was very frustrating and demoralizing because I was good at solving other people's problems. I just couldn't solve my own. So that's kind of how I got into this area, by realizing that my medical training was deficient in teaching me some very basic things about human beings, including emotions and relationships and stuff like that. I had to go out and pursue that knowledge on my own, do personal development work, which I did, and eventually led me to some insights and understandings that said, oh, now I understand where my anger is coming from. Now I understand where my anxiety is coming from. I used to have tremendous fear of public speaking. I would have never volunteered to do anything like this. I would have been a basket case years ago, just at the thought of having to give a public presentation. And I eventually figured out how my brain was making me crazy about speaking in public when it didn't have to be that way. So there are lots of things that we actually have a lot of power and control over regarding our emotions that we don't believe we do because we've never experienced it. All we've experienced is the opposite, which is we're kind of, powerless when we get triggered. We're kind of, we can't do a lot. Although once we get the emotion, we can calm ourselves down. We can do a lot of different, emotion management techniques and things like that to reduce the intensity. But we can't, for me, I know every day I woke up, I was still the same angry guy. It didn't matter what kind of anger management or stress management stuff I did. I still was generating the anger every day. And there was nothing that really reduced that until I understood where it was coming from. So, and the same is true with when you have hormonal changes in your body that are making you more prone to irritability and anger. That may be true, but the anger is still being generated in the same way, whether your body is kind of put you in a state where you're more likely to be irritable. The anger is still coming from the same mechanism the brain is using to have you look at a situation in a way that makes you angry. And we might also, by the way, we also might get angry at our own bodies. It's like my body betrayed me, or why is it doing this? Or now I'm pissed off now I'm irritated that I'm irritated. You know, it can be a double whammy like that, where you start off with a physical thing that makes you irritable, and then now you've got a lot of blame and judgment about yourself being irritable, which now creates a lot more anger and irritability on top of it. It's an unnecessary layer that you could do something about. Maybe you couldn't change the hormonal changes that instantaneously that triggered you to be in that state in the first place. But once you start adding your own your brain's own interpretations and stories and ways of looking at it, those are things you can do something about once you recognize what those are. So that's what I've been doing for the last 40 years. I did it in my own life 40 years ago, identified these things. Wasn't easy, but I figured them out. And then once you see them and you know them what they are, then you see them all over the place. You see them happening all the time. Every time you're angry, you know, okay, my brain's doing these things to me. It's making me look at things in this way. And a lot of times it's not true what your brain's telling you. I don't know. I guess most people recognize that by now. Our brains lie to us all the time, all the time.
Right.
But we don't, I mean, to us, it looks like the truth. You know, it's just, we just accept sort of at face value whatever our brain is telling us to do. It's like, I'm your brain. I would never lie to you. That's not really the case. We're from the government. We're here to help. You know, it's that kind of thing.
So I have never really thought about that the fact that we are creating the anger. And you've said that quite a number of times. So can you talk a little
Yes.
bit more about that?
Yeah, well, you know, we all know that that's what's happening because we've all had experiences where we've been with a friend or a family member, we're standing side by side. We see the same thing on television. We witness the same event, exact same event externally. And each of us has different feelings. Some of us may get angry, some of us may get anxious, some of us may have no reaction at all. So that we know intuitively it cannot be that the external events cause our internal feelings. It has to be something going on inside us that has two people see the same event and one react one way and one react another. So everybody has had multiple experiences of that. So we know intuitively we know that that's not how emotions work. But we have all this stuff coming at us in society saying you made me angry, you know, my anger is caused by the government, it's caused by this politician or that politician or whatever. You know, we would get all this indoctrination into gaslighting us really to deny our own experience, which is that's not how emotions get created. They get created in our brains. And it's actually not complicated how it happens. So for example, if you get anxious, right, the first thing your brain is telling you is something bad's going to happen. Now you don't see that happening. You just, you know, you hear something, you hear a news story, you know, there are terror attacks going on, they've been increased in frequency, and then you start getting anxious. So your brain goes, oh, you're going to get hit by a terrorist attack. And so that starts that's the kind of a brain story or a brain interpretation that starts the process, and then other things click in down the line. Then you get multiple stories lined up together in a stack, and then that gives you the emotion. But if you just take the first one and look at it, you know, how often is it that your brain has told you something bad's going to happen when it didn't happen? A lot of the times. Does that mean that our the odds of us, any one of us sitting on this call today, getting hit by a terrorist attack is zero? No, it's not zero, but it may be 0.00000001, which is essentially zero. But we can walk around in fear, that the odds are very high that something bad's going to happen to us, and it's not really the truth. This happens, as a physician, I saw this all the time in my practice when people would have panic attacks. They would have some palpitations, and they go, "Oh my God, I'm going to have a heart attack." No, you're not going to have a heart. You're 22 years old, perfectly healthy, a couple little skip beats, and you go, "Oh, I'm going to have a heart attack." No, you're not going to have a heart attack. But I know that from my experience. In their world, it's like, "Oh my God, my brain's telling me, I'm going to have a heart attack," and I believe it. And then you get panic. And then the panic causes more physiologic upheaval, which is, I was right. Something bad is going to happen. It's happening. And then you just keep piling more and more negative, judgments on that and negative predictions on that. And you literally can make yourself physically stirred up to where you're really panicking just because your brain sent you an initial message that was false and you bought into it. And that's the case with, it's not just panic attacks, it's the case with all emotions. So again, our brains have formulas for each emotion. Do you, do you all, are you all aware? I'm sure you're all aware.
Yeah.
You're all
Could
aware that
Go ahead.
the media can make us angry whenever it wants, right? They know how to tell a story to make human beings, a large number of human beings, angry. Not every single one of us, but a large number of their listening audience will get angry if they tell a story in a certain way, or a certain set of pieces to a story will generate the emotion of anger. Well, they know the formula. They also can make us anxious. Something bad's going to happen. And here's more details about that. So they know the formula. The media, if they want to create an emotion in us, or a novelist or anybody, if they want to create an emotion in us, they know intuitively how to do it because they know what human beings react to, the stories we react to, the flavor of the story that we react to. So, but that's all going on all the time. So when you're, and a lot of this anger comes up in relationships. So when you're married, or relationship with your kids, or just friends, or working relationships, we're all triggering each other all the time. And our brains are sending us these messages to interpret all those behaviors or lack of behaviors in ways that make us angry. And we don't see the real heart of what's going on. So we're at a loss to really defend ourselves against it. And that's where the emotions kind of take us over, start running away with us, and then create all kinds of other havoc down the road. Then you start throwing things and punching things, and yelling at people, and or withdrawing, or making drawing conclusions about another person's character, or the workability of your relationship, or all you add all kinds of meaning, to these episodes when they get prolonged, and then it further destroys the intimacy and the respect and the appreciation for each other in the relationship. So it's very damaging. I mean, not only can it damage your health, which I saw a lot of in my 23 years of practicing medicine, because as doctors we take care of a lot of people in a medical practice, and you could easily spot the ones who were more angry than normal. They really stick out. And then we follow people over time, which is something that we have an opportunity to do that most people don't. And you get to see what happens to a large group of people under your care over months and years. And you see, oh my God, these angry people tend to come in with more strokes and more heart attacks and more high blood pressure and more other diseases. And they come in, they tell you they got divorced, or they come in, they tell you their kids won't talk to them anymore, or they just got arrested, or they became addicted to drugs or alcohol or whatever. You see this train wreck that follows the more of the angry people than the non-angry people. Of course, in my case, I was sitting there with my own anger when I was young, going like, "Hey, I don't want to end up like this." So that's one of the things that got me to keep going into personal development work. But you really see it very clearly. You see the damage that anger can do, and I think we've all experienced it, at some point in our lives, in certain relationships where it's been very destructive. And I know for me, it ruined every single relationship till my mid-30s, when I figured this stuff out, and was able to put the corrections in.
So, can you tell us a little bit more about what you figured out in your mid-30s specifically?
Again, it was understanding the firstly making the big shift was stop blaming the outside world for my emotions, which, like everybody else, I had done, and realize, wait a second, it looks like it's coming from there, but that's only the trigger. It's just triggering stuff inside me that's actually producing the emotion. And then it became, okay, now what are those things? And then so I was able to figure those things out. And then once I figured it out, been able to teach people. So I have like a coaching program where I teach it to people. Takes me about an hour, maybe 2 hours, to teach people sort of the whole mechanism of how the brain creates anger. It's not very complicated. There are thought processes and perceptual filters and things like that. And then there's some behaviors that kick in that don't cause the emotion, but they intensify it or prolong it. So there have been some studies done to show that any emotion, you get triggered to have an emotion, the normal course of an emotional trigger in a human being, and the chemical reactions and hormonal reactions and stuff, it peaks in a short period of time, and then your body goes back to baseline. And the whole thing takes about 90 seconds if you're not doing something to prolong it. Now, we as human beings have all kinds of capacities for telling ourselves more and more stories that will prolong the emotion or to keep the story going. How bad it was that that person did that and what it means about them, and oh, I should have never trusted them, and oh, whatever. And so we can keep the emotion going, and there are other behaviors that tend to do that. Um, so there are the causes which are more cognitive perceptual, and then there are the prolonging things which are more behavioral. And you can learn those things very quickly. So in my coaching program, which only lasts like 8 sessions, it's all I need to teach people how to deal with anger effectively. You show them the model in the first 2 sessions about how their brain creates the anger. And then the rest of the sessions are, okay, give me a bunch of examples of when you've been angry in your life, or maybe you're angry right now, or today. Maybe something triggered you today. Well, let's work with that. And then you apply the model to whatever their real life situation is. And you go, oh, I never saw that my brain was doing that when I was angry. But yeah, I can see it now. It was definitely doing that. And then you go, okay, now let's figure out what's true and what's not true. Like with the example, something bad's going to happen. Is it true that something bad's going to happen? What's the probability? What's the reality about that? That's what you have to sort of do. You have to sort of take you on your own brain and realize where it may be misleading you or tricking you or causing you to misjudge a situation or make assumptions that aren't valid. Or a lot of times we're missing critical pieces of information that we don't even know we're missing. One example I use very commonly is the fact that people don't believe that we can make anger go away like instantaneously. You can be really triggered, you can be really angry, and then if you understand the mechanism, you can go poof, it's gone. All right, but we've had the experience. Again, there's not one of the things we know is true because we've experienced it. So, for example, you make an arrangement with somebody to meet you at a few days in the future, to transport you somewhere that's very important to you, and you press upon them how extremely important it is they be on time. And they acknowledge they got it, they hear you, they'll be there, no problem. And so you show up way early, you're there, the appointed time comes, they're not there. Okay. 5 minutes go by, still not there. You're starting to get a little bit miffed. Another 5 minutes go by, they're not there. Now you're really, your brain's got you, okay? Oh, I should have never trusted them. They were totally, I should have known better. They were totally irresponsible. They didn't take it seriously. They always do this kind of thing. Why did I think it would be any different? You go through that whole scenario, and then a couple minutes later they show up and they tell you what happened. All right. And they said, oh no, I took it very seriously. I left a house a half an hour early. I made all kinds of notes in my calendar to make sure I would do that. I got stuck in this traffic jam. Didn't see it coming. I got trapped. I couldn't get out. All this kind of stuff. As soon as you see that, which information your brain didn't have when it was making up those other stories about they were just irresponsible, you go, oh, okay, that can happen to anybody. I understand. So I'm not angry anymore because I'm not seeing you as being bad and irresponsible and
everybody free?
All that kind of stuff. Okay. So, but that's an example of what our brains do. They will concoct these stories to make us look at the situation in a way that makes us angry, justifiably angry, because if you were irresponsible after I went to all that trouble, then my anger might be justified, So, but in this case, the brain made up the story and it turned out it wasn't factual. And then the person showed up and gave you the missing pieces of information that you had. So a lot of times, if you can figure out where your brain has lied to you or where your brain has given you a false story, as soon as you realize the story is false, you can let the anger go. I'll give you an example with my wife and I. So we've been married. So I had in my 20s and 30s, every relationship, failure, 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 failure. I was a serial relationship killer. All right. And then I figured out this stuff about anger. And I also figured out some other stuff about relationships before I met my wife, which was very lucky. Okay. And then I met my wife, and we've been married now for 41 years. So I guarantee you that would not have happened if I hadn't figured out this anger stuff and other pieces of the puzzle that were all going on inside me. But anyhow, so and she didn't have a lot of anger in her life, and I had gotten rid of most of mine now. So consequently, we've not had a lot of anger in our relationship. We don't fight a lot. We don't have arguments a lot, and we never did. But early on in our relationship, there was this one circumstance that happened a couple times where we would start snipping at each other. And it was so unusual for us that it really stuck out. If you're arguing all the time, about zillions of different things, they're all going to look this. It's not nothing's going to stand out. But we had a baseline of zero basically. So every time this anger would come up, it'd go boop, just completely stand out. And it happened like 2 or 3 times. And as soon as like the third time, I went, wait a second, that's a pattern. There's something going on here. I got to figure this out. And the interesting thing, it only happened when we went on car trip somewhere, which is weird. And it was even weirder than that because we would never argue or fight on the way to our destination. We would never argue or fight when we were at our destination, travel destination. It was only when we drove home that it would happen. And usually I'd be driving. My wife would be in the passenger seat. We'd be on our way home. And at some point she would say, oh, there's something over here. It's only like an hour off of our path. I've always wanted to go see this. Let's go do that. Okay. And I would go, no, we're not doing that. I'd have this tone and it would be very negative. No, we're not doing that. And she would then respond with, well, what do you mean we're not doing that? And then we go back and forth and back and forth. And so, okay. So one of the first things I knew about anger, one of the mechanism for anger is you're judging that person to have done something bad or wrong that they shouldn't have done. Okay. So I'm saying to myself, okay, do I think that my wife did something bad and wrong she shouldn't have done? I said, yeah, that's why I reacted that way. I definitely think she did. You're not supposed to do that when you're on your way home. And then I asked myself the question, next question was, is it really true that what she's doing is bad and wrong? And as soon as I asked myself the question, like immediately the answer was, well, technically, she's not really wrong. It's just she has a different way of doing it or different preference than mine. And it turns out we have different family traditions. In my family, when I was a kid, we would go on car trips and we would never deviate on the way home. We would always drive straight home. You stop for gas, you stop for food, bathroom breaks, but never would you take a side trip. Her family is the opposite. They always took side trips. They always deviated. So, but as soon as I said to myself, it's really wrong what she's doing, the jig was up. I had to say, no, she's not. Okay. So I was able to sort of debate my brain and go, that's a false accusation that I'm making, which is driving my anger, or at least starting the anger chain. And it's wrong. It's wrong of me. It's not wrong of her. It's wrong of me to judge it as bad and wrong. So I need to stop that. I need to knock that off. All right. So from that point on, this was like 30 some years ago. From that point on, we've never had that argument again. If we're driving down the road now or driving home now and she says, oh, there's something over here now, or, I'd like to go over there. I go, sure, honey, if that's what you want to do, let's go do it. It's my role as a husband to help do as much stuff for you as I possibly can. So it changed the whole flavor of how I saw the request from bad and wrong, and it's a crime and it's a sin or a violation of some preordained, rule to no, it's just she's got a preference, I've got a preference, they're equally valid, and who cares? Most of the time it's not a big deal. It's different if we had to be home at a critical time or something like that would be different, but usually that's not the case. It's just a matter of she has a preference and it's different than how I would do it, but it's okay. It's not a big deal. So again, these it shows you how in the moment you can eliminate a source of anger or recurring, and then over time you can completely eliminate a recurring anger problem by understanding how to look at it in a different way that's truthful, actually more truthful than the way your brain was conditioned to have you look at it or conditioned you to look at it in a habitual sort of way. So that's kind of what we're dealing with emotions in general, is all this conditioning in our brains that has us look at things in kind of cockeyed ways. And we never stop to question it. We never stop to challenge it, to debate, what's true and what's not true. And therefore we run around with all these heightened emotions that are a lot of times based on false ideas, false perceptions when we don't see it happening.
So, if we're dealing with others who struggle with anger issues, do you have some tips and tricks to help decelerate that their anger?
I usually don't like to give tips because
Okay.
I think they're too superficial. But I do have a tip for this. And just anytime you want to interrupt somebody's anger, all you got to do is agree with them. It'll calm them down. It'll really calm them down. You don't have to believe what you're saying is true, but if you just agree with them or have it appear that you agree with what they're how the way they're looking at it, then they'll feel calmed down. Now, it's not the best. It's a short term, diffuse the situation kind of a thing. If you got somebody pointing a gun at you and they're very angry, I would recommend using using it. All right. There may be times when when you don't want to agree with what the person's saying, but basically, one of the interesting things about this model that we're talking about, this methodology we're talking about here, which again is what I've been practicing for 40 years and teaching for 40 years, is the more you work on understanding your own anger and remembering each time you get angry, it's coming from the same group of stories, the same perspectives. And the more you practice that and you practice it and you practice it, first, the better off you'll be and the less angry you'll be, more relaxed, calmer, more at peace, more having all your faculties available, to deal with situations. You still may have situations to deal with, and then negotiations and stuff like that to work out. But interestingly, you also gain tremendous empathy for other people when they're angry because you know exactly that their brain is doing the exact same thing to them that your brain does to you. And in fact, if you've ever had anybody be angry at you, which we all have, from our position of being the one receiving the anger, it's very easy for us to know that we're being falsely judged. They're coming at us because they're, accusing us of this or that or whatever. And we know intuitively we didn't do that, or that wasn't our motivation. They made that up in their head. But we know instantly that that's not the truth about us. But they don't know it. They think it's true. Well, their brain is telling them it's true. All right. So you can have this immediate appreciation for what's driving another person's anger, which can be advantageous because it might keep you from saying the wrong thing. It might even give you some possibilities. You may be able to interact with that person in a better way so you don't escalate the anger or you maybe eventually reach some kind of resolution. But anyhow, at least it tells you what's going on. And a lot of times if that is likely to trigger you to then get angry back at them, which then is going to make them get doubly angry, back and forth and all that stuff, you can interrupt that escalating, anger, producing more anger, or retaliation, producing more retaliation. Have any of you seen the movie Tin Men? It's not a, it's not a recent movie. It was many, many years ago. It was, raise your hand if you saw it. Tin Men, just you, Cindy. So it was filmed in Baltimore, where I was born and raised, and it was in the 50s in Baltimore. I was born in 48, so I'm now 78 years old. But anyhow, in the 50s in Baltimore, one of the big things was getting aluminum siding put on your house. That was a big industry, and there were a number of companies vying for business, competing with each other. And so the movie is about these two aluminum siding salesmen. Danny DeVito plays one character, and Richard Dreyfuss plays the other character. And neither one of them knew each other. They worked for different companies. They had never run into each other. And Richard Dreyfuss had a couple big sales. He buys a Cadillac to reward himself, and he's in this little what do you call it, dealership, community dealership. And so he takes possession of the car one day, and he's backing it out of the driveway onto this little one-lane road. And Danny DeVito is driving down the road, and he just had a big fight with his wife, so he's all in his head. He's not paying attention. He's not going very fast, but he's not paying attention. And Richard Dreyfuss backs out, and he just bumps in, crashes into the back fender of his brand new Cadillac that he just had for 30 seconds. So Richard Dreyfuss is furious. He gets out of his car. He starts yelling at Danny DeVito, "You stupid son," And Danny DeVito's going, "What? It was your fault. You should pay attention to where you're backing out." And so they go back and forth. They each try to get the other one to admit that they were wrong, and neither one will do it. And then finally, Richard Dreyfuss just swipes Danny DeVito's side view mirror off of his car and then drives off in a fit of anger. And Danny DeVito is now really pissed, and he's seeking revenge. So he finds out where Richard Dreyfuss lives, and he goes one night in the dead of night, and he vandalizes his car. Richard Dreyfuss comes out the next morning, and he knows exactly who did it. So he finds out where Danny DeVito lives, and then they start. The whole movie is it's like the War of Roses. The whole movie is this escalating, each one retaliating, and every time one retaliates against one, that they think, okay, well that was uncalled for, so now I have to retaliate more to you, and they just keep upping the ante until by the end of the movie, like it's like a war, like both of their lives are like in total devastation. And to the point where they actually, cry uncle, and they say, okay, let's stop this. Let's call truce. Let's be friends. And they end up being friends at the end of it, which is kind of cool. But it just shows you the how anger can run away with us and cause all kinds of destruction and damage in our lives. And it's really a nasty. Now there are times when anger can be beneficial and useful. I'm not saying it's never a good emotion, but I'd say 80-90% of the time we get triggered to be angry, it's destructive, it's harmful, or potentially so. It's going to cause issues in our relationships. It may cause issues with our relationship. Like I said, if you get angry at your own body for what you perceive as bad behavior or, things it shouldn't be doing, then you've got a problem in your relationship with your own body, which is not healthy, it's not good. And you can avoid that. You can, once you understand the mechanism, how your brain got you there, you can unwind it, and you relieve yourself of that discomfort. So there's all kinds of great benefits from understanding these invisible mechanisms that our brain uses to make us angry. And once you understand anger, the other benefit of understanding anger is you understand how all the other emotions work, because they work in exactly the same way. It's just different. It's just a different set of filters, a different set of stories your brain feeds you. But it tells you they're true, and it makes you believe they're true. And then you go with the emotion, and then you go running wherever the emotion takes you. And it takes different people, different places. But some people get angry, they shut down, and become very quiet and very withdrawn. Some people get angry, they start throwing things and punching things. It's the same anger. It's the generation process is the same. The mechanism is the same. It's just that we've learned, based on how we grew up and the family we grew up in and the neighborhood and culture we grew up in, circle of friends, what to do with that anger once we get it. Sometimes we express it, sometimes we don't. But the important thing is the generation is the same. And the generation is the same even if your hormones are playing a role. Making your body more susceptible to being irritable and maybe more susceptible to interpreting things negatively. But still the same, you've got to still deal with the same interpretations if they're incorrect or inaccurate. Even if you may be stirred up physiologically, you still have the same ability to take a look at your brain and say, how's my brain telling me to look at this situation, whether it's my own body or whether it's somebody else's behavior in my life, and how much of it is true and how much of it isn't. So, and another interesting thing is you don't have to find that every single one of the stories your brain is telling you is false. If you can find just one of them that's false, it'll usually shoot holes in the emotion, and the emotion will just sort of dissolve or become very much weaker because you won't be able to keep it propped up. Because, like in the case with my wife and deviating from the drive home, you just can't keep being angry once you see that you falsely accuse somebody of doing something wrong when they really didn't. It's hard to unsee that once you see it. It's a
So
truth that will follow you.
would that be considered a trigger? That you were
Which
triggered by her deviating from the path that
her request, very
Mhm.
innocent request, oh, let's go over here, was a big trigger to me because it was, to me, it signaled a violation of a sacred tenet of how one is supposed to drive home. That's what my brain told me. Turns out it wasn't the truth, but in the moment, that's how I took it. It definitely was a trigger, all right? But the activity, the anger or the irritation that I had, and then the tone and everything else that followed, declining her request, making her, belittling her for even making the request, um, was all a function of the way that the stories that my brain fed me for how to interpret it.
So
Can you imagine if the discussion we just had was taught to every child before they graduated middle school and reinforced before they graduated high school, for them to understand that when you get triggered to be angry, it's not the trigger that's causing your anger. It's how your brain is telling you how to look at things. And it does it in very specific ways. And here are some of the ways your brain will get you to look at things to make you angry. So just know that, you know, you can't blame the outside world for your anger. You got to look at your own brain. And if you want to do something about it, you can. If you don't want to, that's up to you. But don't go around thinking that, it's the outside world that's making you angry.
so back in your 20s, did you actually make a list of all the things that triggered you? Or when you
No,
started
because
making that
no,
change? No.
actually, you don't need to because there are 1,000 things that can trigger us, and what triggers you might not trigger me. But for each of us, I could have 1,000 things trigger me, and today I have 1,000 potential things a lot of things that used to trigger me that don't trigger me anymore. The point of can be manyfold and are usually manyfold. It's the same stories every single time. They don't change. They're all purpose stories. For any trigger that happens, if your brain gets you to look at it through those particular filters, then you're going to get angry. And that same trigger might not produce those same filters in you, so you won't get angry because those aren't triggers for you, but they're triggers for me because my brain has been conditioned to feed me those same stories. So you don't have to really work on the triggers. You can assume that you're going to keep getting triggered, or at least potentially getting triggered in life, because it is going to happen. You're not going to end the external triggers. The only thing you can do is retrain your brain to, how you're going to look at things, or to really recognize when it's giving you false stories about how to look at things. It's funny. We have in 2026, most of us by now have come to the realization that whatever news source you listen to, doesn't matter what side of the aisle it is, whatever news source you listen to, it's lying to you. It's never telling you the truth. For example, there is no news agency in the world that can tell you every story that happened today. They they can't. They have to pick and choose the stories that they think are important to present to you. And then whichever four or five or six stories that they choose to lead with, they're going to put their own spin on it as to what they think is important for you to know about it, what they want to include, what they want to leave out, based on their biases and their agendas and whatever. Doesn't matter what type of news you're listening to. So we know in 2026, we all know that we're getting fake news no matter what news we're getting. It's never a complete truth. It's always bastardized in some way. All right. It's never everything that happened today or even the most important things that happened today. All right. What we haven't realized yet as a society is we have our own fake news broadcasting station right inside our own brain. And it broadcasts to us 24/7, even when we're dreaming. But it basically is constantly sending us false stories, telling us that this is the truth and you should believe us. And that would be a huge breakthrough for humanity if we recognize that that's what it's like to be human, and that's what it's like to have a human brain that is all constantly filtering things, constantly chunking things down, simplifying things, leaving a hell of a lot of stuff out, leaving a lot of context out, and sometimes even getting things backwards or wrong or who knows what, distorted, all that kind of stuff. That's what our brains do. And that's where our emotions come from. And a lot of other stuff that happens in our life comes from that. So, I mean, it's basically where stress comes from. Uh, so, um, we just have, like I said in the beginning, our biggest problem is we have not educated people to understand what it means to be human, what it means to have a human brain and have human emotions. And that's a huge failing of our education system. That's one of the things that I'm very passionate about wanting to correct. It's like spitting into the ocean at this point. I've been doing it it's been spitting in the ocean for 40 years, I can tell you, and it hasn't made a dent yet. Maybe in certain individuals, yes, but in terms of society writ large, it's still the big wave, the tsunami that keeps coming every day is the opposite. All the opposite understandings that tend to dominate and take over people's collective psyches.
It certainly does seem that way.
Yes.
Um,
Another thing I should point out,
so
another thing is
a
I think it,
wonderful. Mhm.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no, please continue.
Okay. Another point that I think is worth emphasizing is the whole idea of managing your anger. Again, if you stop and think about that, it's not that managing anger is bad, because it's not. There are a lot of good things you can do once you get angry, to keep it from becoming destructive or more destructive. But the whole thing of managing anger is you're really dealing with the symptoms once you've gotten angry. The better choice is what we're talking about today is can you turn off the anger at its source so that you have nothing to worry about, man, do I express my anger? Do I suppress my anger? Well, what if you didn't have it? Then you wouldn't have those, dilemmas or those choices to make or decisions to make. So there's a way to turn off the anger at its source, which is your brain, by understanding how your brain's generating it, understanding the specific stories. And when I work with people in my coaching program, I show them how to write those stories down on an index card, literally. So you can remember them anytime you get angry. So once you understand what they are, and someone like me shows it to you, then you can have a record of it, and you can remind yourself anytime you want, like training wheels on a bicycle. Anytime you get angry, oh, okay, here's what my brain just did to me. A, B, C, D, whatever. And so you see the hidden invisible mechanism. It's literally like Superman like X-ray vision. You literally walk around with most humans can't see this, but I can see it. Here it is right on my index card. And you can make an index card for anxiety. You can make an index card for guilt. And you can make an index card for worry. And it'll give you the stories your brain is feeding you to make you have those different emotions. So anytime you have one of those emotions, you get your index card and you go like, oh, okay, now I see what my brain's doing to me. And then you can go, okay, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? Or maybe not, you know? And if you can't figure out where the falsehoods may lie, you turn to a friend or a family member and say, hey, give me a hand here. I'm looking at things this way, this way, and this way. Do you see any flaws in that? And believe, and they'll very quickly tell you some of the flaws and then or what you left out or what you forgot or what you didn't consider or all that kind of stuff, you know?
So we have to deal with a lot of people now that are, how should I put it, on the emotional edge. So do you have any other ideas about how to decelerate situations?
This is it. This is the education people. Now, not everybody's going to be open to this. I mean, some people get very, very attached to their emotions and they don't want anybody messing with them. I've done a lot of workshops, live workshops over the last 40 years, and mostly were stress workshops, but I would always teach about anger as part of it. So if I had a room full of 40 people, this happened almost every time. And I would start doing this thing on anger, and I'd start teaching a little bit about the anger and the stories and where the anger is coming from. Invariably, somebody would raise their hand, and they would be angry with me. They would think I'm doing something wrong. They would think I was harming these people by suggesting that I was taking their anger away from them because they thought anger was very valuable, part of their identity, part of how they saw themselves. And they can't imagine, living without anger because it would be like taking part of my humanity away from me. And so if they are around anybody who's trying to show people how to get rid of unwanted or harmful anger, not the good kind, but the bad kind, any kind of anger, get rid of, nope, that's a sin, that's bad. They would literally get angry at me. And they would actually be making my point in the room is that their brain is telling them I'm doing something bad and wrong to people when I'm not. I'm not taking their anger away. I'm teaching them when they're in a situation where they have anger that's not serving them or is hurting them or other people, there's a way to get rid of it. And if you want to keep your anger, you can keep it. So it's nothing being taken away. But they wouldn't see it that way. Their brain would tell them, no, he's diminishing them as human beings, which of course I wasn't doing. Um, but that's how they would look at it. So, and I can't tell you how many times that happened. And I almost could count on it every time. It's almost like I felt like if somebody didn't pop up and say that, I wasn't teaching it right. Because almost always had, and it was only one or two people in the room. It was never more than that. But it was interesting.
Well, I thank you so much for imparting your wisdom about this really important topic. And the
Yeah.
world would definitely be a better place if we could all just realize that our brains were making stuff up.
Yeah, yeah. And if
It would really
anybody's involved with education system or even homeschooling, and you have some connections or anybody that want to explore bringing this into their homeschooling curriculum as a, some auxiliary, thing they want to teach or life skill they want to teach, I'd be happy to, explore that with you. Um, it's something I'm really passionate about, getting into our educational system so that at some point, it's part of everybody's education before they graduate.
well, that's fantastic. And I do have some people in mind, uh, you know, but I know that you've given us some really great gifts as part of this, wonderful masterclass series. And I know that one was on, basically helping relationships.
Yes.
So, can you
Yes,
talk a
and
little
that's
bit about that?
one of my focuses is working with people who are married or after divorce and they're still having a lot of anger issues related to the divorce. Or they're still angry at their ex, or they're married now and there's one of both of the spouses is having, anger towards the other spouse, and it's causing stress or strain on the marriage. So this is a handout called "How to Eliminate Unwanted Anger in Your Marriage or After Divorce," and the URL is relationshipsangercure.com, and it'll cover some of the same points we talked about today and give you a little more information about how to eliminate anger. And if you want to set up a call with me to discuss any particular anger issue you'd like some help with, we can do that. So. Happy to give that to folks for a free download.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing this wisdom. And I am going to put your relationship in the chat.
Okay, you're going to put it in there? I can throw it in if you want.
I, I already put that in.
All right, great, great.
Great. So now I would love to ask Katie Friedman to come up, and we're going to be talking about eye health. So I know that's incredibly important to me, um, over the years, but um, I know that today seems like we have all sorts of ways to look at menopause, but eye health, especially in postmenopausal situations, but for older people,
I'm
Katie is
going through
still
all of it.
doing
I'm not leaving
wonderful things.
anybody out. I'm not leaving anybody out. I even have a slide there for men. I tell you, you want me to talk about something? I'm covering it completely.
Okay, so take it away.
Can I share my screen? Do I have that yet? And just as a disclaimer,